A wind, sharp and laced with the salt of the eastern sea, whipped across the plains of Marathon. It carried not the scent of olives or sun-baked earth, but something else entirely. A metallic tang, the ghost of a threat whispered from a distant, colossal empire. On the shimmering horizon, a forest of masts had appeared, a sight so vast it seemed to mock the very gods. The Persians had arrived, their numbers like the grains of sand on the shore, a tide of men in steel sent to drown the nascent flame of Athenian liberty. The air itself felt heavy, charged with an unspoken dread. For the men gathered on that plain, farmers and artisans turned soldiers, the stakes were unimaginably high. This was not a mere squabble between neighboring city-states over a patch of farmland. This was a battle for existence itself. To lose meant the extinguishment of their way of life, the end of the radical idea they called democracia. Their city, Athens, a beacon of thought and art, would be reduced to a footnote in the annals of a foreign king, its citizens either slain or shackled, their culture erased. Every breath drawn on that field was a breath of defiance against oblivion. At the heart of this desperate gamble stood a man haunted by his past and driven by a fierce, almost fanatical, love for his city. Miltiades, an Athenian general who had once served the very empire he now faced. He knew their tactics, their strengths, and their arrogance. He had seen the might of the great king's armies firsthand, a seemingly unstoppable force that had crushed kingdoms. Yet in his eyes there was not fear but a cold, calculating fire. He was a man playing for the highest stakes, with the soul of his city as the prize. As the sun climbed higher, casting long, ominous shadows from the Persian host, the question hung in the air, thick as the dust kicked up by thousands of sandals. How could this small band of citizen soldiers, outnumbered and outmatched, possibly hope to stand against the disciplined, professional army of the largest empire the world had ever known? What secret strategy, what flicker of hope could Miltiades possibly possess that could turn the tide against such overwhelming odds? Was this courage, or was it a collective march towards a glorious but certain death? The answer was revealed not in a clash of shields, but in a feat of audacious strategy and raw endurance. Miltiades thinned his center, reinforcing his flanks, a move that seemed like madness. The Persians, confident in their numbers, charged into the weakened heart of the Greek line. Then the trap was sprung. The Athenian wings wheeled inwards, enveloping the Persian forces in a deadly embrace. Panic, a weapon more potent than any spear, spread through the invaders' ranks. They broke, they fled, a disorganized mob scrambling for the safety of their ships, hunted down by the vengeful Greeks. The Battle of Marathon was more than a victory, it was a myth brought to life. A single moment that echoed through eternity, proving that numbers alone do not guarantee triumph. It demonstrated that free men, fighting for their homes and their ideals, could overcome a force seemingly ordained by destiny. History is not a foregone conclusion written by the powerful, but a story forged in the crucible of such decisive, improbable moments, where courage and conviction can reshape the world. 10 years passed, a decade of uneasy peace. The victory at Marathon became a legend whispered to children, a tale of Athenian valor. But in the opulent halls of Persepolis, the memory was a bitter poison. The shame of that defeat festered in the heart of a new king, Xerxes, son of Darius. He was a man driven by a singular, all-consuming purpose, to finish what his father had started, to erase the insolent Greeks from the map and avenge the honor of the Persian Empire. This would not be a punitive expedition, it would be an annihilation. The preparations were on a scale that beggared belief. An army drawn from every corner of the vast empire, a host so immense that it was said to drink rivers dry. A fleet of ships that would choke the seas. Xerxes was not merely planning a war, he was unleashing a force of nature upon Greece. For the scattered, quarrelsome city-states, the threat was existential. To stand alone was to be obliterated. The very concept of Greece was at stake, a fragile idea that would either be forged into a reality through unity or shattered into 1,000 forgotten pieces. Amidst the rising tide of fear, two cities stood as pillars of defiance. Athens, with its burgeoning navy and democratic fervor, and Sparta, a society Spartan in name and nature, forged into the most formidable fighting force in the known world. They were rivals, opposites in every way, yet bound by a common language, common gods, and now, a common enemy. The fate of Western civilization rested on the unsteady alliance of these two deeply different powers, a partnership born of pure necessity in the face of impending doom. A congress was called at the Isthmus of Corinth. Delegates from across the Hellenic world gathered, their faces etched with anxiety. Old rivalries were set aside, ancient grudges momentarily forgotten. The question was not if the Persians would come, but how to meet them. Where could they make a stand? How could their small, disparate forces hope to halt the relentless advance of Xerxes' grand army? The very geography of their homeland became a map of desperation, each mountain pass and narrow strait of potential, and perhaps final line of defense. The answer, whispered from the lips of the oracle at Delphi, was as cryptic as it was terrifying. When the Athenians sought guidance, the Pythia, priestess of Apollo, shrieked a prophecy of doom, of fire and destruction. But a second plea yielded a sliver of hope, an enigma wrapped in divine breath. Though all else shall be taken, Zeus grants his Tritogenaire a wall of wood to stand. A wall of wood. What could it mean? A barricade on the Acropolis, a desperate, final stand within the city. It was Themistocles, the brilliant, cunning Athenian statesman, who saw the true meaning hidden within the oracle's words. He argued with all his persuasive might that the wooden wall was not a physical barrier on land, but a fleet of ships. Their salvation, he declared, lay not in hiding behind stone, but in meeting the enemy on the waves. It was a radical, terrifying idea to abandon their sacred city, to put their entire faith, their very existence, into the strength of their triremes. This single interpretation would set the course for the entire war. As Xerxes' army marched south, a small, hand-picked force of Greeks moved north to make a stand. Their chosen ground was a narrow coastal pass, a place where the mountains met the sea, a choke point known as Thermopylae, the Hot Gates. Here, the sheer numbers of the Persian army would mean nothing. It was a place where a few could hold back many, a natural fortress where courage could be weighed against might. The defense of this pass was not about victory, but about buying time, the most precious of all commodities. The stakes at this narrow pass were immense. Every day the Persians were delayed was another day for the Greek allies to marshal their forces, for the Athenian fleet to prepare. It was a sacrificial strategy, a deliberate choice to trade lives for time. For the men who marched to Thermopylae, there was little illusion of survival. Their mission was to hold the line, to become a living wall, and in doing so, to give the rest of Greece a fighting chance. They were a shield destined to be shattered, but vital for the survival of the body it protected. At the head of this doomed force was a king who embodied the very spirit of his city. Leonidas of Sparta, with his personal guard of 300 Spartans, men who had all left sons behind to carry on their names. He was a man of few words, bred for discipline and war. His presence was a symbol, a declaration to all of Greece that the Spartans, for all their insularity, would bleed and die for the freedom of all Hellenes. He was not just a general, he was the physical manifestation of defiance. As the endless waves of Persian infantry crashed against the Spartan shield wall, a question echoed in the mind of the watching Xerxes, seated on his golden throne. How could so few men with such simple bronze and wood repel the finest warriors of his empire, including his own elite immortals? What strange power did these men possess? Was it training? Was it madness? Or was it something else entirely, an unyielding spirit that could not be broken by force of arms alone? The answer came not on the battlefield, but through betrayal. A local man, Ephialtes, seeking reward, showed the Persians a hidden path through the mountains, a way to bypass the pass and encircle the Greek defenders. When Leonidas learned that he was outflanked, he made a fateful decision. He dismissed the bulk of the Greek contingent, ordering them to retreat and fight another day. He, his 300 Spartans, and a brave contingent of Thespians and Thebans would remain. They would hold the pass to the last man. The last stand at Thermopylae became an immortal legend of sacrifice. Surrounded and hopelessly outnumbered, the small band of Greeks fought with a ferocity born of despair and duty, until every last one of them was slain. Their defeat was a tactical victory for Persia, but it was a strategic and moral triumph for Greece. The story of their sacrifice spread like wildfire, a tale of heroism that stiffened the resolve of every Greek and became a rallying cry for the battles to come. History is shaped not just by victories, but by the power of such defiant defeats. With Thermopylae fallen, the path to Athens was open. The Persian army swept through central Greece, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. Following the Council of Themistocles, the Athenians had made the agonizing decision to evacuate their city. The Acropolis, the heart of their civilization, was left to the mercy of the invaders. The citizens, old men, women, and children, were ferried to the nearby island of Salamis, from where they could only watch as smoke began to rise from their beloved home. The stakes were now absolute. The Greek army was preparing to make a last stand at the Isthmus of Corinth, the narrow strip of land connecting the Peloponnese to the mainland. The Allied fleet was gathered in the Straits of Salamis, a cramped and anxious assembly. Everything now hinged on the sea. If the Persian navy could defeat the Greek fleet, they could land troops anywhere they wished, rendering the land defense at the isthmus useless. The war and the fate of Greece would be decided upon the water. Themistocles, the architect of the naval strategy, found himself in a precarious position. The Peloponnesian commanders, led by the Spartan Eurybiades, were panicked. They wanted to withdraw the fleet to the isthmus to support the army, abandoning Salamis and the Athenian refugees. Themistocles knew this would be a fatal mistake. The open waters near the isthmus would allow the larger, more numerous Persian fleet to outmaneuver and destroy them. Their only hope was to fight in the narrow confines of the Salamis Straits. As the Greek commanders argued, their alliance on the verge of fracturing, a critical question arose. How could Themistocles convince his reluctant allies to fight at Salamis, the one place where they held a tactical advantage? How could he force a battle on his own terms against a wary and powerful enemy? Persuasion had failed. The fate of Greece now rested on his ability to conjure a solution, a stratagem born of cunning and incredible risk. Themistocles' reveal was a masterstroke of deception. He sent a trusted servant to the Persian king with a secret message. The message claimed that Themistocles was a secret sympathizer of the Persians and that the Greek fleet was in disarray, planning to slip away under the cover of darkness. He advised Xerxes to block the exits of the straits immediately, to trap and destroy the entire Greek force. It was a monumental gamble, an act of psychological warfare that preyed on the king's arrogance. Xerxes, eager for a final, crushing victory, took the bait. He ordered his fleet to move into the straits during the night, blocking any chance of escape. When dawn broke, the Greek fleet found itself trapped, exactly as Themistocles had planned. With retreat impossible, they had no choice but to fight. The massive Persian fleet, lured into the narrow channel, became a disorganized, crowded mass, unable to maneuver. The smaller, more agile Greek triremes rowed out to meet them, turning the cramped waters into a killing ground. The wooden wall held. The Battle of Salamis was a devastating blow to the Persian war machine. From his throne on the shore, Xerxes watched in horror as his invincible navy was systematically destroyed. The defeat was so total that the king, fearing his army would be cut off in Greece without naval support, decided to retreat with the bulk of his forces back to Asia. He left behind his general Mardonius with a still formidable army to complete the conquest the following year. But the tide had irrevocably turned. The final act of the great invasion was yet to be written. Mardonius spent the winter attempting to break the Greek alliance through diplomacy, trying to bribe Athens to switch sides. His offers were rejected with contempt. As spring arrived, the decisive confrontation loomed. The largest Greek army ever assembled, a force of hoplites from across the Peloponnese and Athens, gathered to face Mardonius's remaining forces on the plains of Plataea. This would be the final test of arms. The stakes at Plataea were the culmination of everything that had come before. A Greek victory would mean the end of the invasion, the preservation of their freedom. A defeat would render the sacrifices at Thermopylae and the triumph at Salamis meaningless. It would prove that the Persians could still conquer them on land. The future of Greece and the political and cultural ideas it represented would be decided by the clash of spears and shields on this one field. The armies faced each other for days, a tense standoff, neither side willing to make the first move on unfavorable ground. The Greek commander was the Spartan Pausanias, a regent for Leonidas's young son. He was a cautious, deliberate man, facing an enemy that still held a numerical advantage and a powerful cavalry. The Greeks were hampered by a fractured command structure and logistical problems, their resolve tested by the long, nerve-wracking wait. The battle was finally initiated not by a grand strategic plan, but by a series of skirmishes and a critical Persian cavalry raid that disrupted the Greek supply line and fouled their water source. Forced to reposition his army at night to find a new source of water, Pausanias's maneuver went awry. The Greek center retreated further than planned, and the battle lines became fragmented and disorganized. To the Persians, it looked like a full-blown retreat. Seizing the opportunity, Mardonius ordered a general charge. What followed was not the route the Persians expected, but a testament to the discipline of the Spartan hoplite. The Spartans and their Tegean allies, caught in the open, turned and stood their ground against the full force of the Persian charge. The Athenians, meanwhile, were engaged by the Theban contingent of the Persian army. The battle dissolved into a series of desperate, brutal struggles across the plain. The central question now was simple: could the Greek phalanx hold? The turning point came when a rock thrown by a Spartan soldier struck and killed the Persian general, Mardonius. With their charismatic leader dead, the Persian will to fight shattered. Confusion and panic spread through their ranks, and the charge faltered, turning into a desperate flight back to their fortified camp. The Greeks, sensing victory, surged forward. They stormed the Persian stockade, and what followed was a massacre. The Persian invasion was over. On the very same day, miles away across the Aegean Sea, the remnants of the Persian fleet were beached at Mycale. The Greek fleet, which had pursued them, landed their marines and hoplites and attacked. The Ionian Greek contingents in the Persian camp switched sides, and the Persians were decisively defeated once more. The twin victories at Plataea and Mycale were the final, emphatic answer to Xerxes's grand design. The threat of subjugation was lifted. The aftermath of the Persian Wars ushered in a new era. The shared struggle created a powerful, if temporary, sense of a common Greek identity. Athens, whose city was in ruins but whose navy was triumphant, emerged as the leader of a new alliance, the Delian League, formed to continue the war and liberate the Ionian cities. A golden age was about to dawn, a period of unprecedented cultural, artistic, and philosophical achievement, funded by the spoils of war and the tribute of its new allies. But the seeds of future conflict were also sown in the soil of victory. The very unity forged in the face of the Persian threat began to curdle into rivalry. The Delian League, under Athens's increasingly assertive leadership, slowly transformed from a voluntary alliance into an Athenian empire, creating resentment and fear among other city-states, most notably Sparta. The defeat of one empire had inadvertently laid the groundwork for the rise of another, and for a devastating new war between the Greeks themselves. The legacy of these wars is monumental. The unlikely victory of the Greek city-states preserved a unique way of life and a revolutionary political experiment, democracy. It created the conditions for the flourishing of classical Greek culture, the bedrock of Western philosophy, art, drama, and science. The names of Marathon, Thermopylae, and Salamis became more than just battles. They became symbols of the struggle for freedom against overwhelming power, stories that would inspire for millennia. Yet a final, lingering mystery remains. Was this conflict truly an inevitable clash of civilizations, of freedom versus tyranny, as the Greeks themselves portrayed it? Or was it a more complex affair, a collision of expanding powers driven by ambition, revenge, and misunderstanding? The history we have was written by the victors, a narrative crafted to celebrate their own heroism. The Persian perspective is largely lost to time, a silent testament to the fact that the telling of history is itself a form of power. This entire saga, from the shores of Ionia to the plains of Plataea, reveals a profound truth about the course of human events. It is not always the largest army or the wealthiest empire that prevails. History is often shaped at the margins, in narrow passes and cramped sea straits, by audacious gambles, strategic genius, and the unshakable resolve of those who have something more to fight for than conquest. It reminds us that the future is never truly written, and that it can be redirected by the will of a few in a single, decisive moment.